Yes, so the question reads, 𝗔𝘂𝗃𝗏 Limited is considering project with the following details. So one, we are given the initial capital cost. So the initial capital cost is basically, in other terms, the initial investment. So then we are given the residual value, which is also known as the terminal cash flow, the selling price per unit, which is 1,100, the variable cost per unit 500, the fixed cost per unit 5 million, and then you're given additional information about when you're told annual number of units will be sold 30,000. Number two, the project has a useful life for 5 years. So that is number two. Number three, we are told the company uses weighted average cost of capital work of 12%. So what are we required in part A? We're required to compute the base net book value, and then from there, we are required to carry out sensitivity analysis on NPV, assuming adverse variance of 5% for all inputs except the project life and the weighted average cost of capital. So then we are required in part C to prepare an appropriate chart to indicate different NPVs for each scenario in B above. In this case, we are given an NB and you're told adverse variance in this case means a decrease in cash flows and an increase in what? In cash outflow. So we are going to start with part A of this particular question here. And actually, I hope you can see in part A, we are basically required to do what? We are required to come up with the NPV of this particular project here. So let me just copy this one. So this solution will be here. This will be our solution. Yes, so this will be a solution here. So in part A, we are required to compute now the NPV. So the net present value. Now remember, to compute the NPV of a project, we take the present value of cash flows, the present value of cash flows, and then to this we less the initial investment. This is something we need to recall from whatever we did in our previous session. So that is how we compute the NPV. So we take the present value of cash flows minus the initial investment. Now, we are given some information here, and therefore the first thing we need to do is to compute the present value of cash flows, because I hope you can see we are given the initial investment. The initial investment is this particular amount here, the initial capital cost. That is the initial what? Investment. But the first thing we need to do is to compute the cash flows. Then we discount those cash flows. We have the present value of cash flows. Now, we are given some information here. And actually, in additional information number 2, we are told that this project has a useful life for 5 years. So the first thing we need to do here is basically to have our years here. So our years here, basically we're going to have year 1 all the way up to year 5, all the way up to year what? All the way up to year 5. And then from there, we're going to have now the various variables which we need to have here. For example, here we're going to start by having the selling price per unit, because I hope you know that for us to be able to compute the cash flows from this project, we are going to take the sales minus the costs. That is how we are going to get the cash flows. So therefore, we start by having the selling price per unit, So the selling price per unit, in our case here, we are told that this one will be what? This one will be 1,100. This one will be 1,100. And actually, that one will not change for the next 5 years. Okay, this one will not change. The amount will remain the same. Okay, let me type this here manually so that... yes, will be 1,100. Basically, that one will not change. It will remain 11. So then the other variable which we also have here is basically the number of units to be sold. The annual number of units to be sold, this one. Or actually, you can just refer to this as the sales in units. Because for us to compute the sales or basically the revenue of this company, we must have the selling price per unit and basically we multiply that with what? With the number of units to be sold. The number of units to be sold in this case, we are told 30,000. 30,000. And actually, equally, these will remain the same in the next 5 years. Then from there, we also need to have the other variables. And basically, we can also have this variable cost per unit. Variable cost per unit. We can also have these fixed costs. Fixed costs. Sorry, that should be okay. So let me undo here. Yes, so we need to have this particular fixed cost. Fixed costs. We copy this, Control-C, Control-V there. Yes, so basically for us to compute the cash flow, I've said we need to have the sales minus the costs. Is there anything else we need to have here? Because we're given the project life, the weighted average cost of capital. Yes, so I think maybe we can just have this one. So the variable cost per unit is 500. And actually, this one will not change. It will basically remain the same. It will remain the same like that. The fixed cost per unit in this case will be what? will be 5 million. So it will be equal to this one. It will be equal to that one. Okay, so let me type this manually. It will be 5 million like that. Yes, 5 million, 5 million. Okay, so having that, then I think we can proceed and now compute the cash flows. Now remember, for us to be able to compute the annual cash flows to be generated from this project, the annual cash flows to be generated from these projects. So automatically we are going to take the sales. That is basically what we need to know, minus the costs, minus the cost of these projects. That is basically how we compute the annual cash flows, the cash flows to be generated on annual basis. So therefore, the first thing we must have here is our sales, So how do we compute these sales? We compute these sales by taking the selling price per unit, this one, times the sales in units, this one. So we get the total amount here. So then what we need to do, we don't have to repeat that. We just need to apply our formula across. We need to apply our formula. So the sales in this case will be 33 million, like that. Will be 33. Then to this, we need to less now the costs. We need to less the costs. So in our case here, we have basically a number of costs. We have the variable cost, and then we have the fixed cost. So we can start by computing the what? We can start by computing the variable costs, of which in this case now this will not be the variable cost per unit, but this will be the variable costs, but not per unit. Variable cost like that. So how do we compute this variable cost? The variable cost will be equal to the variable cost per unit, this one, times the number of units produced and sold, that is this one. So, and then we apply our formula across. We apply that formula across. That will equal will not change. Will not change. Yes. So then from there we have the fixed costs. This one. The fixed cost per annum. So the fixed cost per annum, this one will be equal to this one. And actually, equally, this one will not change. That one will not change. It will basically remain the same. It will remain the same. So I think having that, because we don't have any other cost, so we can proceed and we get the annual cash flows. Annual cash flows And the annual cash flows in this case will be equal to the selling price. That's what we have said here, or to the sales, not selling price, to the sales minus cost. So this one will be equal to the sales minus the two costs, this minus also this. Yes, so that will give us now the cash flow in that here of that million. And actually that will remain the same in the next 5 years. So this is the annual cash flows to be generated from this particular project. But equally, you must also be able to recall there is another information which you're given here, this one, that there is a terminal cash flow. Remember terminal cash flow or the residual value. This is basically the cash flow which is generated by the project at the end of its useful life. So meaning that this is the cash flow to be generated at the end of the 5th year, And how much is that? A terminal cash flow. It is basically the amount of 2.5, yes. So then what we need to do now here is to get now the annual cash flows. Sorry, the total cash flows, that is, which will be equal to the annual cash flow plus the terminal cash flow here. Yes, so and then we apply our formula like that. Yes. So this is now the cash flows to be generated from this particular project. So having these particular cash flows, what we need to do is basically now to get the present value. Because we already have the cash flows, we need to get the present value of these cash flows. So how do we get the present value of these cash flows? We get the present value of these cash flows by multiplying with the present value interest factor at which rate we are going to apply this particular rate of 12%. That's why we're given the company's cost of capital, 12%. That is the rate we are going to apply. And basically, for n period. For n is basically the number of years. This should be small n. So, and you have now to recall the formula which you apply here. So this one will be equal to, so the formula which you apply here should be 1 plus r raised to power negative n multiplied by our cash flows. So we take 1 plus r, which is 0.12, and therefore this one would be 1.12. And then we do what? We raise that to negative n. What is our n? Our n is this one. So don't type, but pick the figure value you have up there. Because now we're not going to repeat that, so we will just apply this formula. So once you type 1, then if you drag the formula will be picking 1. But if you pick that one, so if you come to this year, our Excel will pick what is up there, and so on. So don't type that one. Basically pick whatever you have up there. So we enter, and I think we equally, because always the figures in the table are given to 4 decimal places. We can reduce this to 4 decimal places. We can make this to be in 4 decimal places like that. And then what do? We apply our formula across. Our formula across here. Yes. So basically it will be that. And I hope you can see, for example, in this case, we can just click this cell. The last one, we see how this figure has been computed. You can see the formula up here. You can click there, and you'll be able to see how that figure has been computed. Is 1.12 raised to power negative 5, which is here, which is basically correct. Okay, so having that, then we get the present value of cash flows. Present value of cash flows. Present value of cash flows. So how do we get the present value of cash flows? We take our annual cash flow, this one, times the present value interest factor, this one. We enter, and then we do what? We basically apply our formula up to the last 5, up to year 5. And I think we can equally work with these ones to the nearest whole number. We can reduce those decimals to the nearest whole number like that. Now, having this, what we need to do then is to get the total present value of cash flows. So we get the total present of the total present value of cash flows here, and the total will be 48 to 86.58. So why are we getting this total? We are getting this total because we want now to get the NPV. How do we get the NPV? By taking the total present value of cash flows minus the initial investment. So to this, then what we are going to do, we are going to less the initial investment. The initial investment. So our initial investment is the amount which was initially invested in this project, which is 40 million. So this one will be equal to this one, 40 million. And I think this one we can just make it as a negative by multiplying that with a -1. Yes, we make it a negative, so that now we deduct it from the total present value of our cash flows, and basically that will give us NPV of 8 million 286.58. So that is now the present value or the net present value, sorry. This is the NPV, the project what? NPV. So the NPV of the project here. Yes, so that is it. That basically what was required as far as part A of that question is concerned. So the examiner was requiring the students there to compute the NPV, the NPV. Okay, so then from there, I want us to move to the other part. I hope that is clearly understood, Sarah. I hope that is clearly understood.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so let's move to the other part now. Let's move to the other part. We move to the other part of that particular question here. So in part B, we are required to carry out a sensitivity analysis of NPV, assuming assuming an adverse variance of 5% for all inputs except the project life and the weighted average cost of capital. So let's get this one. Well, actually, we do this one. So we are required to carry out sensitivity analysis on NPV, assuming adverse variance of for 5% for all inputs except what? The project life and the weighted average cost of capital. Now, the first thing we need to appreciate here is that in computation of this particular NPV, which we have computed up here, of 8,280,000, the number of variables which we have used. Now, which variables have we used in computation of this one? So a number of them. So one, we have used the project life. We have used the selling price. We have used the sales value. We have used the variable cost per unit. We have used the fixed cost, including this particular terminal cash flow, cash flow, and also the discount rate of 12%. So basically what we are required to do is now to compute a new NPV. We compute a new NPV, assuming that there will be adverse variance of 5% of all inputs, of all what? Inputs. Now, for us to be able to do that, we always start with the, remember whatever we have computed up here, this is the NPV for the base case. That's what we are actually told in Roman 1. We have computed the NPV for the base, or actually have computed the base net NPV. So basically assuming that none of the variables here will change. So, but in this case now, we are told to assume all the variables will change adversely with 5%. And actually compute the new what? NPV. So for us to be able to do that, the first thing we must have here is to start with the base case. So we can just have the base case here, the base case. And after that, then you're going to have all the variables affecting the NPV. Which variables affect the NPV? We have a number of them. So we can start with this one. We can start, actually we can pick all these ones the way they are. We can pick all these variables and we just paste them here. We just paste them here. So we have the initial cost. We have the residual value, which is the terminal cash flow. We have the selling price per unit. We have the variable cost per unit. And then we have the fixed what? The fixed cost. There is also another variable which is not captured up here. And that is this one, the sales in units. That is also another variable which is used in the computation of NPV. Used in the computation of NPV here. And also we know that there is another variable that is the discount rate and the useful rate. But in that case, we are told to assume that those ones will not change. Those ones will not do what? Will not change. So what I need to do is basically to have these values under the base case, under the base case. So the initial cost or the initial investment here is 40 million. This one 40 million. The residual value under the base case, is 2.5. This one. Then we have the selling price per unit. Selling price per unit here is 1100. This one. And then we have the variable cost. The variable cost under the base case. Under the base case is 500. Then the fixed cost per unit. Sorry, not per unit, but rather per year. This one is 5 million. So then the sales in units. This one I hope you can remember in note 1 is 30,000. And just pick what I have up there. Yes. So basically that is the first thing I will have. And then I need now to have the different scenarios. And actually my scenarios here, we are told to assume adverse variance of all inputs. All inputs will have adverse variance of 5%. So therefore, what I need to do here is basically to have different scenarios. So I'll have a number of scenarios here. A number of scenarios. So basically, we are going to start with the first variable here. That is the initial capital. So the initial capital here, I will assume it will have adverse variance of 5%. So meaning that in this case, I'll have. So, and in this case, let me ask, by saying that the initial capital will have adverse variance of 5%, what does that mean? Will they? But there is a hint which you're given here. Remember, this hint that is the one should guide you in terms of coming up with those particular various scenarios. So we are told adverse variance in this case means decrease in cash inflow. For cash inflow, it will reduce. If it is a cash flow we are considering, adverse variance means a decrease. If it is a cash outflow, adverse variance means cash increase in cash outflow. So that is what should guide you in terms of coming up with this particular scenarios. So therefore, if it is a cash flow you are considering, cash inflow you are considering, adverse variance means that cash flow will reduce. If you are considering cash outflow, that cash flow will increase. If you are considering adverse variance. So therefore, you're going to consider 5% adverse variance for all these variables. And I think we will start with the first one here, the way they are arranged. So if it is initial capital, we are going to assume it will increase with 5%. So therefore here, the first scenario will be, we consider 5% increase in the initial cost. The initial cost. Initial cost, or the initial investment, that is initial cost. Then, okay, okay, just a minute. So the reason why we have a problem with it is because we are starting with the plus. So for you to avoid that, what we do is that start always by typing a comma. Is it a comma? Yes, this one. Is it a comma? Yes. You type that. You say 5% increase. 5% increase in initial costs. Initial costs. Initial costs. Initial costs, like that. Yes, so that will be the first scenario. So for the other scenario will be about the residual value. So the residual value, basically this one is a cash inflow. Is that the case, Sarah? So 5% adverse variance means what? The residual value will increase or basically will reduce with 5%.
It will reduce.
It will reduce. So therefore this one we have And I've said that you always need to start with this. So unaona hii inaitwaje? See, is not basically a comma. So because
apostrophe.
Yes, hiyo apostrophe hiyo. Because tumesema ukitype hivi, so hii ni negative 5%. 5% in what? In residual value. Value. Ukienta inakuwa na shida. Si unaona ukienta inakuwa na shida. So basically to avoid that, what you do, you always start with that apostrophe there. Unaiweka hapo mbele. So hiyo shida inaisha. The same case here. Maybe you can just remove this. Yes, like that. Okay, like that. Yes, so the other scenario is whereby you're going to assume a 5% adverse variance in selling price. So 5% adverse variance in selling price, we assume the selling price will reduce with 5%. So here, negative 5 or 5% decrease. 5% decrease in what? In selling price. In selling price. In selling price, that is the other scenario. The other scenario will be for the other variable, which is the variable cost. Variable cost is a cost. We are going to assume it will increase with 5% because it's a cost. It is a cost. So plus 5% plus 5% in variable cost. Variable cost. Then the other item is the fixed cost. So fixed cost is also a cost. We're also going to assume it will increase with 5%. 5% increase in fixed costs. Fixed costs, like that. And then I think the last variable here is the sales in units. So a 5% variable variance, we are going to assume that this one will reduce. So let me just copy this one. Copy, and then I paste it here. Yes, a decrease in 5% in sales volume. Sales volume. Sales what? Volume, sales volume, like that. Okay. Yes. So basically, we are going to compute now the NPV under those scenarios, under all those scenarios. So I hope you can see now the scenarios which we have. We have a number of them. The best case, the 5% increase in initial cost, 5% decrease in residual value, 5% decrease in selling price, 5% increase in variable cost, 5% increase in fixed cost, and 5% decrease in sales value. Those are basically our possible scenarios, and we are saying that we compute the NPV under those various scenarios, here. So now here we are saying that the initial cost will increase with 5%. So the initial cost here will be 1.05, which is the same with 1.5%, times what? Times whatever you have here, that one. So here it is increasing with 5%. But now, under all these other scenarios, we assume our initial cost remain the same. It remain 40. So it will remain 40 here under the other scenarios. Under the other what? Scenarios, it remain 40. Okay. So no, I need to have this one will be 40. 40 like that. 40 like that. 40 like that. Yes. So here it is under this scenario is where it is increasing with 5%. But under all the other scenarios, it remain 40. So then we consider now the other variable, which is now a 5% decrease in residual value. So now here, under the first scenario, our residual value remains the same, 2.5. But in this case, it will reduce with 5%. So here it will be equal to 95% or 0.95 times whatever you have here, times what we have here. It is reducing there with 5%. But now all the other scenarios here, it remains the same. It remains 2.5. This one. Here equally it will be 2.5, like that. Like that. Then we consider now the other variable here, that is the 5% increase in selling price. So here the selling price remains the same. Here it remains the same. But now here we are saying it will reduce with 5%. So here it will be 0.95 of what we have here. So this one should be equal to, it should start with equal to this one. Yes, so it will reduce with the 5%. But now equally here it remains the same, 110. Here it remains, that is 1100, not 110. Yes, like that. Okay, so this one should be equal to be 110, like that. Okay, so then here variable costs. This carry here will be 500, 500, 500. Yes, okay. This one will be 500. Yes, but here the variable cost, we are saying it will increase with 5%. So if it increases with 5%, it will be 1.05 times whatever you have here. Whatever you have there, 525. And then here it will remain the same, 500. And then here it remains 500, like that. Okay, so then here the fixed cost remains the same. Still here remains the same, here remains the same, here remains the same. I hope that will, no, we need to bring it here manually. Okay. So let me undo. Okay, so this one will be 5,000. Okay, so but here the fixed cost will increase with 5%. It will be 1.05 times this one, and then here it remains the same, 5 million. So then here the unit selling price will be 30,000. That will remain the same all the way up to that point. But here now this one will do what? Will increase with, not increase rather, it will reduce with 5%. So this one will be 0.95 of this one, yes. So now that is the first thing you need to do. So you need to come up with these particular values at the three other these particular scenarios which you are considering, because what we need to do is basically to compute the NPV under all those scenarios, scenarios. But now, before we proceed to compute now the cash flows, because for us to compute this NPV, we must have the annual cash flows and also the terminal cash flow. So before we do that, there are two other variables we are going to add down here, which are used in the computation of NPV. So the other variable we need to have here is basically the project life. Project life. And actually in this case, we are told the project life, we assume it will not change. The project life remain the same throughout. These will remain the same. And all scenarios, that remain the same. The other variable which we also use in the computation of NPV is basically the cost of capital. The cost of capital also we are told to assume that this one will remain the same. And we know the cost of capital is 12%. Is 12%. This one we also told, we assume under all the scenarios, this one will not change. That's what we are told here. Carry out sensitivity analysis on NPV, assuming a 5% adverse variance of all inputs except project life, and the cost of capital. Those ones will not change. Those ones will not do what? Will not change. Now, then having this, I want us to compute the NPV under all these scenarios. So how do we compute the NPV? For us to compute the NPV, just like what you have done up here, we need to have the sales, we less the cost, such that we have now the annual cash flows. We have the annual cash flows. After having those particular annual cash flows, we proceed and we add the residual cash flow. We get the total what? We get the total cash flows. We discount those cash flows, and then we less the, after getting the total present value of cash flows, we less the initial investment. That is basically what we need to do here. So meaning that the first thing then we need to have here is basically what is the sales. Maybe first of all we can have, because these are the variables we are going to use. So we need to start by having the sales under all these scenarios. So the sales, this one will be equal to what? This one will be equal to the sales in units, this one, times the selling price per unit, this one. That's how we compute the sales. So that one will be 33. We apply our formula across. So that will be the sales. That will be the sales at all those scenarios. So then to this, what do? We less the costs. So the cost here will comprise of the variable cost and the fixed costs. So we can start with the variable cost here. The variable cost, and then we also have the fixed cost. Yes, so the variable cost, this one, will be equal to the unit to be sold times the variable cost per unit, this one. Yes, and then what we need to do, basically we apply our formula across. Then from there we have the fixed cost. The fixed cost will be this one, we enter, and then we do the same. So the fixed costs which are up here, the cost we are going to have down here. Yes, and then from there what we need to do is basically to have the annual cash flows, annual cash flows. And in this case, when talk about now the annual cash flows, you need to note that here we're going to have now the cash flow from year 1 up to year 5. And actually these cash flows will remain the same. Cash flow from year 1 up to year 5. For example, I hope you can remember at the first or at this case scenario, at the best case scenario, up here, you can see our annual cash flow from year 1 all the way up to year 5 was the same. This one will remain the same. But now, actually from year 1 all the way up to year 5, it will remain the same. But remember now in the last 5 years, in the year 5, we have the terminal cash flow. So the same case here. So the annual cash flow from year 1 up to year 5 will remain the same. And actually, like in our case, we know under the best case scenario, we should get annual cash flow of 13 million. Whatever you have up here, we should get annual cash flow of 13 million. Let's see whether we are going to get the same value. So how do we get this one? We get this one by taking the sales, this one, minus the two costs, this one, minus the fixed cost. We should get 13 million. So that basically our what? Our cash flows. And actually what we need to do then is basically to apply our formula across. We apply our formula across like that. So those now would be the annual cash flows. Cash flow from year 1 up to year 5 under those different scenarios. Now, equally, for us to be able to get now the NPV, there is something also we need to have here, and that is the terminal cash flow. Terminal cash flow. Where do we have that terminal cash flow or the residual value? This one. Let me just copy this one. I bring it up, bring it down here. So the residual value, let me just refer to this as terminal cash flow because I think that is the appropriate name. I refer to this as terminal cash flow, which is basically cash flow received at the end of year 5. Terminal cash flow. Cash flow. Yes, so this one will be equal to whatever you have up here. And actually, we need to have the terminal cash flow under the other scenarios. Yes, now having this, then what do I need to do now? I need to discount these cash flows. I need to discount these cash flows. And in my case, I have two types of cash flows. I have the annual cash flow, this one, and also I have the terminal cash flow. So how do I discount this one? The terminal cash flow. So I'll not the terminal, but the annual. So I'll start by getting the present value of the annual cash flows, cash flows. Now, in this case, I'll have to apply a formula here. So I need to compute the present value. So to compute the present value, I come to that cell and I say, I want present value. So type that PV, and then you open the bracket. Once you open the bracket, you can see basically you are being guided in terms of what to input. You first of all need to pick the rate. What is our rate? Our rate is this one. Then comma, NPAR. NPAR, we said, is a period. This cash flow, remember, will be generated for the next 5 years. So our N is 5. And then from there, the amount. Now, the amount, we want to discount this. But now, when recording this, we record it as a negative. Pick it as a negative. If you put it as a positive, then it will give you a wrong figure. So that is what you have to remember. And then you pick this amount here, which is the annual cash flow. And then you do what? You enter. We are going to confirm, because we have already discounted these cash flows up there. We are going to confirm whether we're going to get the same values. We do what? We enter. So you can see that the value here is appearing in dollars. We said you can do away with the dollar by introducing a comma like that. The dollar sign will disappear. Yes. So then we need to apply this across. We need to apply that across. And basically what we have discounted are these annual cash flows, not the terminal. The terminal cash flow is not included here. Then we get the present value of a terminal cash flow, terminal cash flow. Now, in terms of how we discount this one, it's a little bit different, because these are cash flow which is to be received at the end of the 5th year. So to discount this cash flow to be received at the end of the 5th year, we don't apply the formula which I've used up here. So to compute, to discount this one, we take the cash flow, multiply that with the present value interest factor at the rate of 12%, for n period. So now you have to remember the formula for this. Okay, you have to remember the formula for this. The formula for this is 1 plus r raised to power negative n. So that is basically what we are going to do here. So this one will be equal to 1 plus r, which is 1.12 raised to power negative n. Our n is 5, because this amount will be received at the end of the 5th year. So raised to power negative n, which is 5. Don't type 5, pick whatever you have up here. So that will give us the present value interest factor at the rate of 12% for 5 years. And then multiply that with the terminal cash flow, which is here. Multiply that with the terminal cash flow, which is there. And then you do what? You enter. So then we apply that formula across. We apply it like that. So in equally, we can make these figures to, we can do away with the decimals, that is. Yes. So whatever you have here, this is the present value of the terminal cash flow. Then from there, what do I need to do? I need to get the NPV. How do I get the NPV? To get the NPV, I will take what? I'll take the present value, the total present value of cash flows minus the initial investment. So therefore, this one will be equal to total present value of cash flows. So I need to add these two cash flows first of all. The present value of annual cash flows plus the present value of terminal cash flows, and then minus initial investment. Initial investment, I have it up here, this one, 40 million. Yes, I hope you can see how we have computed that. Present value of this total present value of cash flows minus the initial investment, which will give us 8 million. Actually, we can confirm this. from whatever we did in part A. Did we got NPV of 8 million to 86,58? Is that what we got up here? Yes. This is basically what we got. This is what we got up here. So therefore, you can see our computation is giving us the same value here. Is giving us the same value here. So what I need to do basically here is to apply my formula across. To apply my formula across. So I'll drag my formula here. Okay, just a minute, sorry. So I need to apply my formula across here by dragging it across. So I'll be able to get now the NPV under the various scenarios. Under the various what? Scenarios. And actually in our case, basically we are done. So what we have been able to do here is basically to compute the NPV, assuming a 5% adverse variance in all variables except the cost of capital, except the project what, right? And actually we have said that the main objective of doing this particular scenario analysis is trying to assess the variable which is critical. Which variable can if changed, will affect now the NPV. And actually, by considering these particular NPVs here, you can see like here, our NPV is drastically reducing. So which variable is this? Which variable is this? This is selling price. You can see selling price. If you touch the selling price, you reduce the selling price with 5%, then that is adversely affecting our what? Our NPV. The other one is this one, variable costs. And also this one, sales volume. So you can see these are basically these are some of the variables whose reduction is adversely affecting what? Adversely affecting the NPV. Affecting the NPV. So that's basically how we do the sensitivity analysis on NPV, basically assuming a change or adverse change in those particular variables. So we are done with that particular point. And actually, you can see that was quite involving. So let's do the last part, whereby we are required to prepare appropriate chart to indicate the different NPV for each scenario above. So we just copy this one. So this one is quite simple because we have everything. Yes, so in this case, we are required to prepare an appropriate chart to indicate the NPV, different NPV for each of the scenarios. So for us now to be able to do this, to come up with a chart, the first thing we must have here is a dashboard. A dashboard, basically a summary of the NPVs under the different scenarios. So which are the scenarios? First of all, these are our scenarios here. We need to pick these particular scenarios here and their associated NPVs. The associated NPVs, these ones. So we just copy this. We Control C, and then we have it down here. We have them down here. We Control V. So in our case here, what do we have? We have basically different scenarios and the associated NPV. The associated NPV. Associated NPV. Associated NPV. Yes, so basically we need to come up with a chart, which is quite simple. So to come up with a chart, we just need to highlight all this. And then we come up here, we say insert. Insert. Where do we have insert? We insert, come to all charts, none which is recommended. So basically we come to all charts here. We can pick this one. We can pick this one and we say, okay. Yes, then we can change this formatting here. Okay. Yes, we can just pick like which one? Yes, let's pick this one. Yes, so we drag it down here. We drag it down here. We drag it down here. We can make it a little bit bigger if we need to do that. Yes. So now what do we have here? We have basically a chart showing the NPV of the company at the different scenarios. So you can see, for example, here, in the best case, or in the best case, our NPV is around 8 million. So this is whatever you have here. So or if the initial cost increases with 5%, our NPV reduces to around 6 million, whatever you have up here. So if the residual value or the terminal cash flow reduces with 5%, our NPV will still be around 8 million. So basically, whatever you have here, this has been reflected in our chart down here, in our chart down there. So therefore, this basically what was required here in that particular question is a very good question on sensitivity analysis